So, hello everyone, my name is Braden Bird. Of course, I love seeing new faces, so if you don't know me, I am your secretary, and hopefully next year I'll be your treasurer. I've been collecting for quite a long time now, about 11 years, and I've kind of started specializing in earlier U.S. coinage, specifically bust coinage. And so this past summer, I went to the ANA summer seminar in Colorado Springs in June. And so I've been taking some of that information that I learned, as well as some information that I found on archive.org, and kind of compiled a presentation on the early minting process, which is similar but different to the current minting process. While on the drive here, I kind of thought to myself, why do I do this? I've done a couple presentations before, one last March on patterns, and then one in February on errors and varieties. I think the best lesson that I learned from the ANA summer seminar wasn't anything to do with coins, but camaraderie. So being able to share information with people. And so with that, if you've seen me in the shop, I may have told you I'm not the best at explaining information. So being able to do these presentations does help me, and of course I hope it helps everyone of you. I love learning, and so I love teaching as well. I tell my friends if I wasn't doing numismatics, I would be a teacher. So I'm going to start off before the mint was created in 1790. So the U.S. was about 14 years old at this point. George Washington was president, and in January 8th, 1790, we had our first presidential address to the House of Congress. During that speech, at the latter half, Washington said that uniformity in our currency is an object of grand importance and will be duly attended to. So, being 14 years old, we are a relatively young country, and so talks of creating a currency system, not only currency, but a measurement system, which was, if you read the document, it was very, it's all over the place. And so George Washington decided to bring it up during our first presidential address to the House of Congress. So a lot of this information came from archive.org. If you've never used the site before, I highly recommend it. You can get a lot of historical documents. Most are saved. The ones that are saved are uploaded, especially a lot of the early documents. And so here is a journal from the House. You're able to see journal from the House, journal from the Senate, journal from Congress, journal from even the Mint. And so this is just a little snippet on Thursday, on April 15th, a couple months after the presidential address, where it stated that there was an order for the Secretary of Treasury to produce a report to the House for a plan of a mint. We didn't have a mint at that point. A lot of the coins being struck were either foreign coins or privately minted coins. And so they decided, hey, let's come together and put a mint together. Of course, a couple years back, 1787 ratified in 1788, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5 of the Constitution says the Congress shall have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and fix the standard of weights and measures. It took a few years, but they finally came up with something. Again, like I said, if you've read the weights and measures document, it's kind of crazy. They said that 10 inches was a foot, as well as some other things that we obviously have changed today. So the Journal of the Senate in 1792, of course, a lot of numismatic people know that the Coinage Act of 1792 comes from this act, which on April 2nd, the President of the United States, it says the President of the United States has this day approved and signed an act establishing a mint and regulating coins of the United States. Over on the left, the Treasury Department, this was in 1800 from the Speaker of the House. It refers back to this document. an act establishing a mint and regulating coins of the United States passed on the 2nd of April, 1792. While doing my research, I found this pretty interesting. There was a magazine called the Salem Gazette. Of course, information was a lot slower back then. They didn't have the internet. And so I found this interesting. It says, an act to provide for a copper coinage, which was approved May 8th, 1792, which of course this was a month after the act was actually passed. So nothing really special. I just found that interesting and thought I'd share. So, where do we start? Start at Ye Olde Mint, which was starting to be constructed in July of 1792. Didn't get finished until September of 1792, but no better place to put it than Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, our capital at the time. Something that I know is a little controversial. One of the most famous coins that came out of 1792 was the half bean, which is considered the United States first coin. I personally do not consider it the United States first coin because it was not created actually at Philadelphia Mint. It was created in the basement. I forget his name, but he was a private minter, and so I personally don't consider it our first U.S. coin, but a lot of people do. As I said, it began construction in July of 1792 and didn't get finished until September, and then officially opened in early 1793. What's interesting is, I guess, the premise of the Coinage Act of 1792. In 1793, we only minted copper coinage. We didn't actually start minting silver until 1794. But in the act, it said that there would be 1,485 parts pure silver and 179 parts of copper alloy. If you do the ratio, that's 89.2% silver and 10.8% copper, which is really weird. Why would they do that? That I'm unsure. It's kind of a weird alloy mix, but from mint records, we can see that in 1793, they didn't have that issue. It was all pure copper, so they didn't need an alloy that was silver. But in 1794, when they were beginning to create silver coinage, we see that the half dime followed that 89.2% and 10.8% rule, but the half dollar and the dollar was a 90-10% alloy, 90% silver, 10% copper. No one really knows why this happened. My speculation is maybe it was a rush job. They're needing to create these coins as fast as they could, and so it was easier to do a 90% silver, 10% alloy than the latter. But also, it being a weird mixture, they may have just not really known at the time how to do that weird mix. The original mint building was 3 stories tall. The first story was where they would actually create the coins. The second story was the business offices, and the third story was the assayer's office. In the basement, that's where they held the vaults, so as less ceiling as possible. But also interestingly, they would have horses that would go around a post that would spin the milling machine, the rolling mill. You would think maybe they would be used for our actual minting of the coins, but they were used for the rolling mill, which I'll get into. So the first process, after they've assayed the metal, they would pour these long bars of sorts. Once they poured them, they would be put through a rolling mill. A lot of these images here are from the A&A Money Museum at their mini mint, which replicates what it was like minting coins back in the day. And so, first process, they would have these horses spin around and around constantly for the entire day, rolling these giant presses, and they would feed the metal through into the desired thickness. Couldn't tell you the thicknesses that they would need to, but of course they had probably preset settings, and they had put these bars through. And as you can see on the left, that's what it would look like right after it was melted down, and then on the right, after it was the correct thickness, of course they would be elongated out. The second process is the blanking process. So I really like this process because it takes I guess it is a die of the correct diameter of the coin, and it would strike and punch out blanks. Then, let's see. So this is what's known as wetting. So right after you blank a coin or strike a blank, you'd be left with this piece of metal known as webbing. They would recycle this and create more blanks with those. But this is what a blank looks like. It looks like a normal planchet. However, there is a big difference between blanks and planchets.
Is that you in the picture?
Yes, that is me. So I took these photos, or someone took them of me while I was there at the A&A Museum making my own tokens. So I was able to take some souvenirs home with me so that I could create this educational piece. So like I said, blanks and planchets are completely different. That is because with the next process, the upsetting mill, also known as a Castaigne machine, it would create a reeded or lettered or just indented edge. As far as our old coins, a lot of them were either reeded or lettered, and so you would have these dies here. Here's an example at the A&A that they're inverted, so that whenever you cascade a blank, it would create a positive where you can actually see the edge, seen in the right photo over here. You would take a blank and you would feed it through the middle in between the two dies, and you would roll it, and it would create a lip on the edge, and that would then be used in the striking process. So if you've ever heard of like a type 1 and a type 2 planchet, type 1 is technically not a planchet, it's a blank, but a type 2 would actually be the blank planchet. So, die making. Die making back then was very complicated, as it is sometimes today. It isn't just one die, it's actually technically 4 stages. So you have a master hub, a master die, a working hub, and a working die. And I'll explain a little bit here. So the two dies here are both working dies. This here is also a working die. It's been grounded so that you can't, replicate, counterfeit. But it was actually used in 2004 with the Westward Journey nickels. And so this here would be an example of a working die. Most people, when they think of a die, it's a working die. So let me go into the differences. So the very first, generation 1 of a die is a master hub. So we don't actually have any examples of master hubs of back in the day. Most likely all of them have been destroyed, as the majority of any dies back in the day would be, so to prevent counterfeiting. And so here on the left is an example of a modern quarter. So the master hub is just the very initial design, usually created from plaster. If you've ever seen plaster renditions of coins or commemoratives, this is where they come from. Of course, now they use CNC machines. They didn't have that back in the day, so they had to create it by hand. On the right here is an actual die, a cat bus die, but I've kind of inverted it and taken away the features. Back in the day, it wouldn't have any details other than just the device. So Lady Liberty, which that's pretty much all we used back in the day. So it'd either be a Lady Liberty on the front, obverse die, or a eagle on the back. So that's a master die. Generation 2 would be a master hub. Generation 2 is a master die, which is a negative of the master hub. All master hubs are positives, so that whenever you actually look at the die, it looks like the actual coin. It's not inverted, none of the texts are inverted, they all look right. And so with the master die, it's all inverted. These two here aren't master dies. It's actually pretty hard to find examples of what a master die looks like, but it pretty much looks exactly like this here. So they're generation 2. The purpose of this second generation is just to have an additional example of a master hub to keep it from we don't want to destroy the original hub so that we can just create duplicates of it. So that's pretty much the purpose of this. Back in the day, we would take this master hub, say the cat bust, and we would add stars, denticles, dates. On the verse, we'd add the legend in the United States of America. We'd add the scroll, e pluribus unum, and the denomination, which was one of the most important parts, either 5 cents, 25 cents, or 50 cents, or $5 to build a gold hat eagle. A working hub, again, we don't really have a lot of examples of back in the day, and so this is a modern working hub of a 2014 Kennedy hat. Since it's a hub, it's a positive, and so just like a master hub, a working hub is going to look like the actual point, so that whenever you look at it, all the features, in the example of the Kennedy, all the liberty looks right, the date looks right, and God we trust looks right. Kennedy is facing left. Same with the reverse. And these I consider are kind of the most important dies of sorts because they create our working dies. Working dies are the most common type of die, just like what you may be used to seeing if you've ever looked at a die. They are negatives. That way, when you strike the coin, it strikes it in a positive. And so there are, like the example here, dozens and dozens and dozens of examples of, say, Kennedys, and it'd be the exact same back in the day when they were creating whatever denomination of coin. So it can be a little confusing, and so I call it kind of like the die family tree. So you have the very first generation on top. This generation will create a master die. This master die will create working hubs, and then the working hubs will create working dies. So either like a family tree, or I kind of think of it as like a bee colony, where you have the queen bee at the top, and then the working bees that create clones of each other. So main purpose of this was we don't want to destroy the very first die. If we destroy the first generation or second generation, we're going to have to keep redoing dies over and over and over again. And back in the day, it was very, very expensive. So the easiest way was just kind of create copies of each other, and so that you can make that original die last as long as possible. So I had a very, very fortunate group that I was in. I did the attributing of early half dollars, and there was only 5 of us. And one of the instructors, Stephen Roach, is one of the educators at the A&M Museum. And so, because they were renovating and he was able to kind of get into that, we were able to handle these original dies. The first two one's an 1823 large cent. The next one is from an 1813 reverse large cent classic head. And the last one, my personal favorite, is from an 1820s $5 gold half eagle. And I know kind of hard to see in the photo, but up close in person you could actually see little bits of gold in it, which I thought was really, really cool. But if any of you know anything about restrikes, the first two might seem a little bit familiar. So these two dies actually created the 1823 restrike cent. I can't remember when these coins were struck. I think it may have been like the 1850s or 1860s. But a gentleman had purchased these dies and essentially created his own cents. So I inverted the photos of the dies so they look like positives, and you can match it up perfectly. You can see the large cut between 9 and 12 o'clock, and the T-shaped die crack that goes through Liberty and through her chin. And then on the verse, you can see kind of that mountain die crack. And then one of the things that I think is the coolest is die rust, where you can see bits of speckled in and around cent in one side. But a lot of this dieware created a lot of problems. Because dies were pretty expensive back in the day, they kind of had to find ways to keep the dies living. And so the best way that they did that was lapping the dies. How they would do that, they would try and fill in that metal, say from rust, and then try and file it down so that it disappears. The most common example of lapping was overdates. So whenever they had a good die that they could reuse back in the day, they would just recycle it for the next year or maybe several years down the road. So the best example, in my opinion, of die lapping being used as it was intended is the 1806/5 half dollar. From in person, if it's a circulating example, you can't really tell that it's a 6/5. It's virtually impossible to see. In uncirculated examples, you can see a little bit of the 5 at the top, but it wasn't very noticeable. The only way you can really tell that it was a recycled 1805 die was actually the stars. So all 1806 half dollars are small stars. You can see here on the right, they're pretty small compared to the other two examples. And then in 1805, they were all large stars. And so, say you have an 1806 with large stars, then you know it's a reused 1805 die. Good examples of when die lapping was used, I guess, inefficiently is other overdates. 17, think of 1817/3 half dollar, 1807/6 large cent, where they pretty much disregarded die lapping or very minimalized it and just stamped the 11 letter 7 into the die itself, and then created coins based on that. But it would also be used, like I said, with die rust, or if there's die cracks. You couldn't really fix a die crack since that was an actual structural error. But for the most part, they try to save that die and use it as much as possible. Heck, even with the actual die breaks on the edges, as long as it didn't really cover the date or the denomination, they just used it until that die pretty much exploded. Back in the day, before 1836, they didn't have steam presses. So the steam press came from France. Before then, they would use a screw press, which was a 2 to 3 person operation. You would have these steel balls at the end of the die, which they would swing around, and that force would then strike the coin, or the planchet, making it into a coin. And so you would have a person sitting there, put a planchet on, wait for it to go, take it off, quickly put another planchet on, and continue that cycle. The process was fairly slow. They could make about 20 coins per minute, and by 1802, they had 5 of these dies at the Philadelphia, or 5 of these presses at the Philadelphia Mint. So you can tell just by mint records that they didn't make a whole lot of coins back in the day until 1836, where they had that steam press where they could just churn out coins, pretty quickly. And now they make 74 million, I read, coins every 24 hours. So it's quite a different process now than it was back in the day. Another process is adjusting. So back in the day, silver, gold, and copper was expensive. It is expensive now, but when we were using it as coinage, they didn't want to create a coin that was worth more than its face value. And so the way they would combat this was they would literally take metal off of the planchet or the coin if they could. So in this 1805 example on the left, you can see all those lines that go across her bust. And some people confuse this for scratches, but this was a mint process, and so it's not considered damage. Same with the flowing hair half on the right there, where there's kind of like these X's on the bird. It's the same thing. The planchet weighed a little bit too much, and so they tried to remove metal just to save money, or like I said, they didn't want to make a coin worth more than 50 cents for these denominations. But also on the contrary, if the coin was too light, then they may plug the coin. This didn't happen very often. Really, the only 2 examples are the 1792 pattern cent and the 1795 half dollar, where if the coin was too light, they would just add a little bit of silver to it, either to get up that denomination compared to its weight, or just get up the weight, as in the 1795 example. But after all that process, you would have these absolutely beautiful coins. I think one of the most memorable things from the mini mint, you know, creating my own tokens was, it was a hard process trying to, you know, like it wore me out, and I only made like 12 examples. So I really, you know, back in the day, it was tough conditions. I'm sure it was really, really hot in that mint. They didn't have air conditioning. And having just to, you know, hour after hour, you know, I'm sure they had some sort of break, but being able to make these nearly perfect examples of coins that, you know, what we consider, you know, errors now, like a backtrack or whatnot, really well centered, great design. It was truly an art form back in the day. Not saying it is now, but having to do it by hand back in the day was just, you know, it's phenomenal to see how someone could create something like this. Yeah, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
What year did they quit Silver Press?
1836 is when they introduced the steam press. Any questions?
I think to be the dude sitting in the pit.
Oh,
Yeah.
Don't want to lose a finger.
Yeah.
You talk about weight and measurement.
Yeah.
Where did the Troy ounce come from?
That's actually a good question. I read a little bit of an article on it where it was like 171 like Troy grams or whatever. I don't know what they use the word Troy in it. I'm not exactly sure where it comes from, but I'm assuming it was just a measure of metal.